Yo, what is up, guys? It's Freddy Knows Ball here, back with a brand new video. Today we've got command of evidence text for you. All right, this is going to be a good one. It's going to need a pretty good attention span, though. I'm not gonna lie, guys. Every time I see a command of evidence text question, especially in the hard module of the SAT, I just want to get out of there. I'm not gonna lie. This is where even I struggle a little bit because man, some of these questions just look like essays and a whole different language sometimes. But I'm gonna do my best to show you guys how to understand them and be able to do these questions consistently, get them right consistently, and not be intimidated by them anymore. So let's get right into it. The first thing I wanna mention is BOSS. Build your own solution. Guess what the answer is gonna be. It's actually kind of cool for this one, guys. It's kind of nice to be able to guess because it's kind of like guessing what the ending of the story is going to be. Because that's basically what command of evidence text questions are. It's basically telling you a story, and it's typically asking you to make the end of the story based on the evidence in the text. Command of evidence, get it? So yeah, it's basically trying to put the pieces together. You got to be a detective, and you got to figure out what the ending to the story actually is. You want to be emotionless when you are looking at command of evidence text questions. I think that's a good rule for a lot of the questions, but by emotionless, I don't mean to sit there during your test like this, okay? I'm saying like be strict in your mind, be strict with the answer choices. I'm mainly saying be emotionless when you get to the answer choices and don't let one of them sway you. Make sure you have your guess concrete and you know what the text is talking about before you look at the answer choices, okay?
Ball knowledge.
The ball knowledge for today is to focus on the claim. In command of evidence questions, there is going to be a claim that researchers make, or Bob and others make, or some scientist's discovery, right? So we want to look at that claim. I always like to highlight the claim. I would personally recommend that to you guys as well. Highlight the claim so you don't have to hunt through the passage for it all the time, especially on those longer passages where it's like finding a needle in a haystack, guys. Without further ado, let's get right into our first practice question. Many insects are iridescent or have colors that appear to shimmer and change when seen from different angles. Scientists have assumed that this feature helps to attract mates, but could also attract predators. But biologist Karen and a team had the idea that the shifting appearance of colors might actually make it harder for other animals to see iridescent insects. To test this idea, the team put beetle forewings on leaves along a forest path and then asked human participants to look for them. Some of the wings were naturally iridescent. Others were painted with a non-changing color from the iridescent spectrum, such as purple or blue. The question is asking which finding, if true, would most directly support the team's idea. So in this case, we're not actually trying to find the end of the story. We're trying to find something out in the world that could potentially help the idea that they're trying to convey in this passage. So let's try to get the main idea of what the text is trying to say here. In my words, this would be scientists tested whether the iridescent colors would help insects hide by placing the iridescent and the solid colored beetle wings on leaves and then asking people to find them to see how well they do. So what would most directly support the idea that the shifting appearance of colors might actually make it harder for other animals to see iridescent insects? You see, that is the claim. That is the claim I want you guys to highlight. On average, participants found most of the purple wings and blue wings and far fewer of the iridescent wings. Exactly. That perfectly proves that the iridescent wings were harder for the participants to find, and therefore the shifting appearance of colors made it harder for the animals to see iridescent insects. Obviously, it's people, not animals, that were finding the insects, but that does still support the team's idea. Let's make sure the other three are wrong. On average, participants found the iridescent wings faster than they found the purple wings or blue wings. That's the opposite of what we want. Some participants reported that the purple wings were easier to see than the blue wings. That's not inclusive of the iridescent wings. Some participants successfully found all of the wings on the leaves. That's also not really proving anything. That's actually refuting the team's idea. It's not supporting it. Let's move on. Let's read the question first. Which finding about the basin will most directly support Cardenas and Lamb's conclusion? Although it's clear that Mars once had liquid water on its surface, astronomers have debated whether the evidence of ancient water reflects a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions, the so-called wet and warm scenario, or a brief period of melting in an otherwise consistently frozen environment. Researchers Benjamin Cardenas and Michael Lamb recently added to this debate by using data from NASA and the Mars Orbiter Laser Altimeter to map the topography of what is now a large basin in Mars's northern hemisphere. Cardenas and Lamb concluded that the wet and warm scenario is likely correct. There's their conclusion. That's what we need to support directly. Let's try to put it into our own words. So my summary for this question would be, so scientists debate whether Mars had the wet and warm scenario or a brief period of melting. So Cardenas and Lamb studied the basin on Mars and concluded that it's likely the wet and warm scenario. That's my summary. Something that could support the conclusion is pretty much anything that's talking about the wet and warm scenario being correct. So any other study that has proved that, or some study saying that water reflects a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions. Its dimensions and shape indicate that it is unlikely to have formed as the result of an asteroid or comet impact. That's not talking about the wet and warm scenario. It has features suggesting that it once held an ocean that underwent gradual sea level changes over an extended time. Okay, so gradual sea level changes are supportive of the wet and warm scenario because it's a prolonged phase. If it's a gradual sea level change, that's prolonged. And so I really like B here. Its physical characteristics are most consistent with it having formed as a result of a massive but short-lived influx of liquid water. So massive but short-lived immediately tells me that this answer is wrong because it has to be a prolonged phase to support the wet and warm scenario. It is surrounded by channels that could have been formed either by running water or by flowing lava. Okay, running water kind of would make sense, but lava doesn't make sense at all. I think this answer choice is trying to catch you off guard. If you don't understand the text, you might think wet and warm means water and lava, but it actually doesn't. So B is our correct answer here. Which quotation most effectively illustrates the claim? All right, this is actually a shorter command of evidence text question, but it is a hard difficulty, so let's focus up. An Ideal Husband is an 1895 play by Oscar Wilde. In the play, which is a satire, Wilde suggests that a character named Lady Gertrude Chiltern is perceived as both extremely virtuous and unforgiving, as is evident when another character says blank. Alright, so we're trying to find a quote that most effectively illustrates the claim. The claim is, this lady is perceived as virtuous and unforgiving. That's what we are trying to prove. Virtuous and unforgiving. So I don't honestly really know what virtuous means, so we're gonna look at unforgiving because that one's much more clear. And our guess here is basically just finding something where she is unforgiving. That's what I'm looking for in the answer choices. Lady Chiltern is a woman of the very highest principles, I am glad to say. I'm a little too old now myself to trouble about setting a good example, but I always admire people who do. So unforgiving would be like, she doesn't forgive people. So that doesn't really align. Do you know, Lady Chiltern, I don't mind your talking morality a bit. Morality is simply the attitude we adopt towards people whom we personally dislike. So that's kind of talking about morality, and it mentions Lady Chiltern, but it's also not really showing me the unforgiving aspect. Lady Chiltern does not know what weakness or temptation is. I am of clay like other men. She stands apart as good women do, pitiless in her perfection, cold and stern without mercy. Okay, I see without mercy, and I'm immediately liking this answer choice because that's pretty much a synonym for unforgiving. Now let's read D. Lady Chiltern, you are a sensible woman, the most sensible woman in London, the most sensible woman I know. All that's saying is that she's sensible. Has nothing to do with unforgiving, and literally without knowing what virtuous means, I got to the right answer, C. That just goes to show that even with these hard difficulty questions, guys, try to keep it simple. If you don't know a word, try your best to rule out the answer choices and you can make a guess in between the ones that you aren't sure about. In this case, just so you guys know, virtuous does mean having good morals or like being morally good, just so you guys know. Let's move on to the last question. Which finding would most directly weaken the astronomer's claim? All right, so we're trying to weaken the claim. Given that stars and planets initially form from the same gas and dust in space, some astronomers have posited that host stars, such as the sun, and their planets, such as those in our solar system, are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. This idea is also supported by evidence that rocky planets in our solar system are composed of some of the same materials as the sun. Okay, so let's start with finding the claim. Some astronomers have posited that, and there's the claim, host stars and their planets are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. So to weaken the claim, we either have to say host stars and their planets are not composed of the same materials, or we have to say the planets contain greater quantities of the materials that make up the host star instead of equal or smaller, right? Or we can say both of those. And since this is a hard question, I have a good feeling that we're not going to see both of those. I have seen this question before, so I already know that we're not going to see both of those in the correct answer. But now that we have a guess, let's go ahead and read through the choices. Most stars are made of hydrogen and helium, but when cooled, they are revealed to contain small amounts of iron and silicate. So A doesn't say that the materials are more. It doesn't say that the planets contain more of the material. And it is saying that it's composed of different materials, but we're not talking about host stars. We're talking about just any stars, right? Most stars. So that's why A is incorrect. A nearby host star is observed to contain the same proportion of hydrogen and helium as that of the sun. So that's supporting the claim because it's talking about the planets containing equal quantities. It's also saying that it's composed of the same materials. So this answer choice would definitely get a lot of people because a lot of people wouldn't have read the question carefully and they would have thought, oh, that supports the claim, let me pick it and move on. But in reality, we got to weaken the claim. Evidence emerges that the amount of iron in some rocky planets is considerably higher than the amount in their host star. This is the correct answer choice. Considerably higher. That is weakening the claim because it's supposed to be lower, according to the astronomers. Perfect. The method for determining the composition of rocky planets is discovered to be less effective when used to analyze any other kinds of planets. So yeah, D is just talking about the rocky planets, and it's also not really talking directly about the claim. So that's why it's incorrect. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I just want to thank you guys for sticking around all the way until the end. We have one more question type until we are done with reading and writing, and that is half of the SAT completed on this Road to 1600 series. I'm super excited for the next video, and I'll see you guys there. Peace.